David, and talk about a jumping plant lice, and I think he's going to focus on the boxwood psyllid. But this is a family of pests that affects not only horticultural plants in our gardens, but also fruit orchards. There's a whole family of them that can impact a different number of both economic and horticultural plants. So David, do you want to share your slides, or would you like me to?
Please share the slides. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
All right. Psyllids are a pretty fascinating insect. I didn't know anything about psyllids when I volunteered to do this presentation. And so I thought, well, gee, this is going to be an opportunity for me to learn a lot. And I am still learning a lot because they're an interesting insect, but also an insect that may be involved with like a doomsday bacteria that has cost the United States, Brazil, and Africa billions and billions of dollars because of their impact on citrus crops. So I will get to the citrus story at the end and try to relay some recent research. But for purposes of our talk, I'll go real quickly through the background of what a psyllid is. Then we'll talk about boxwood psyllid, which seems to be the major psyllid pest in Virginia and in Maryland. And then we'll talk about the Asian citrus psyllid. And there's also an African citrus psyllid, which are the psyllids which are so problematic in the southern states of the United States and also in California. All right, a psyllid is a family of insects. There are about 170 species that I could find on the internet. I think that's a California statistic. And of the 170 psyllid species, about 10 of the psyllid species are exotic or invasive psyllids. So they came from other countries into the United States with plants or fruit. And it's the exotic invasive psyllids that are the major problem because they didn't come with their predators or pest control, natural pest control techniques. So psyllids, they're very, very small. They're about, Liz, could you go to the second slide, please? Okay, there's a good photo of a psyllid, an adult psyllid on the right. That's magnified a lot because a psyllid in the adult phase is roughly 1/12 to 1/5 inch big. So it's 1 or 2 millimeters in size. It looks like a cicada, like a grasshopper, but it's green or brown. And the psyllid on the right-hand side has just emerged from its larval stage. They're called nymphs when they're in the larval stage, and they go through, I think, sometimes 5 nymph phases. But what's interesting about this psyllid, and which is a major way that we detect psyllids on plants, is because they are so small, it's really hard to see them with your naked eye, is that the larval nymph psyllids secrete or excrete. I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, but I think it's a mixture. They secrete waxes, they excrete the honeydew, the poop from their eating activities, and it creates this white filament, this white waxy cover that's used as a protection against mites or other predators. And it's how you can detect psyllids on your plant. You can see in the left photo white on one of the psyllid nymphs. It's sort of on his tail, and it's what they like to, again, to secrete, excrete to protect themselves. Now, psyllids are voracious eaters. They interestingly eat new shoots from various plants. And one psyllid eats one species of plant, or so one psyllid species eats one plant species or a family of plant species. So they're very specific to the plants that they eat. Now, another way to detect psyllids is related to their name. They're jumping plant lice. And if you have psyllids on your boxwood and you touch your boxwood branch and you go towards the new growth on the tip of it, you may see an explosion of these little small white or brown adult psyllids jumping out. Professor Raup, whose name is on the bottom of the right-hand slide, who is a professor at the University of Maryland, says that these psyllids, when they bite humans, they don't hurt you. But nevertheless, they are called jumping plant lice because of their lice-like characteristic when they are touched. So it's really interesting, the types of plants that psyllids prey on. Can we go back to the first slide, Liz?
Mhm.
In Virginia, psyllids are primarily known as a boxwood pest. In fact, they're one of the most common boxwood pests, according to the Virginia Cooperative Extension. And when the eggs hatch on the scale that surrounds a bud, and the little nymphs come out, they start to munch on the shoots, the new shoots of the boxwood, and they create what's called a cup on the boxwood leaf, because what they're doing is they're sucking sap out of the plant. And when they suck the sap out of the plant, the boxwood shoot, the leaf, starts to become inverted, and it becomes a telltale sign that you have a psyllid problem if all the new shoots on your boxwood are in a cup shape. Now, what's interesting about the boxwood psyllid is it doesn't kill a boxwood. It's not fatal to your boxwood to have these psyllids. So it's an aesthetic problem primarily when you have psyllids on your boxwoods. It infects your plant. If you don't like what it's doing to your plant, it's difficult to treat. What people recommend is that if you think you have a psyllid problem, you've had maybe a psyllid problem the year before, when the new shoots of the boxwood appear, you prune the new shoots. And that's the easiest way to keep the psyllid population under control, because psyllids live about 1 year on boxwoods. There's like 1 generation per year on a boxwood. And the boxwood basically has, at the end of the fall, beginning of the winter, it has these terminal buds that are going to have scales over them, and the adult psyllid, before it dies, the female will lay eggs in the scale that surrounds the terminal buds or the lateral buds. So the eggs will spend the winter, in the scale, sort of protected from the elements. And then in the spring, like in April or May, that's when the eggs hatch and you start to have these nymphs appear. And the nymphs are the big eaters. They're the big phase for the psyllids to munch away on the boxwoods. That's when you try to control them through cutting the new tender branches. If you want to spray them with neem oil, you want to spray the plant before it starts to cup, because once you have a cup, the neem oil can't get in there. So you have to spray the new shoots on the top of the shoot and underneath the shoot to kill all of these larval nymphs as they're appearing. If you want to use a systemic fertilizer, it's not really recommended, because boxwood do have little flowers in them and they can kill the bees or other insects that are good, maybe perhaps predator insects. But you can use systemics in the fall and after the blooming season's finished, and that may have some impact on your boxwood psyllids. But the major recommendation from the plant experts is that you sort of leave your boxwood alone, live with the aesthetic problem that you might have. They're not considered as dangerous to your boxwood as the leaf miner is. And then Liz, could you go now to the third slide? Okay, so we have here another picture of the filaments left by these little psyllid insects in their nymph stage that they leave on the plant. So it's sort of a telltale sign that you've got a problem. Now let me say a few things about the Asian citrus psyllid. I think we have one participant here. I think her name is Alia, who's from California, Berkeley. And there is lots of really interesting material from the University of California Extension Service and Riverside on the Asian citrus psyllid. And one could spend hours looking at all the YouTube videos on the research being done, because the Asian citrus psyllid is a major pest in the United States. Because the Asian citrus psyllid, when it starts munching on citrus leaves, like grapefruit leaves or orange leaves, it introduces a bacteria called Huanglongbing, also called a greening disease, into the citrus plant, and the citrus plant will die in 5 years' time. The fruit is inedible, and it is basically a terminal disease for your citrus plant or your citrus tree. My parents have a property in San Diego. We have a citrus tree in the yard, and I'm just wondering whether these Asian citrus psyllids have gotten into this tree, because in California, they're doing a really good job of controlling the spread of this bacteria, Huanglongbing, HLB, to commercial citrus areas by focusing on homeowners and trying to get homeowners to take care of their plants. If a tree is infected, it can be taken out by the California state officials. They can cut it up and take it away, because right now it's really, really hard using insecticides, systemics, to spray these critters. But in Florida, it's caused a huge problem. It's reduced the Florida crop of oranges for fruit, fruit juices, juice oranges by 60%. It's cost billions of dollars each year. The average production of an acre of a citrus grove in Florida has gone from 400 crates to 100 crates because of this pest. And there's lots of new research being done on treatments. I thought, after watching one video, that it was like COVID, and it was going to be, like vaccines were going to come out and something was going to happen. And then the biologist said, nope, there's no cure. It's going to be with us. It's going to get worse. But there's new stuff on the internet where the University of California at Riverside has figured out a way to put a peptide, I guess a type of chemical from an Australian lime bush into a spray, which can spray onto a tree and allow the tree to develop a resistance to this Asian citrus psyllid, because basically the phloem of the tree gets blocked by this bacteria carried in the psyllid. And if you can't get the phloem to work, then the tree dies. So I'm happy to answer any questions and give you any of the sources later on, but it's a really interesting insect, and it's one that has a huge, economic impact on Brazil, citrus area, on South Africa, and on the United States. So thank you.
David, there was a question in the chat. Are there varieties that are resistant to this pest, and how big of a problem is it in our area?
Okay, in our area, the major problem is for boxwoods and a type of tree that I'd never heard of before called a hackberry tree, Celtis occidentalis. But it also can affect persimmons, acacias, coneflowers, eucalyptus, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, olives, and all fruit trees. Okay. But when you do the research, you do more digging, it's the tomato and potato crops in Colorado that seem to be having problems with psyllids, not tomatoes here in Virginia, or not potato crops up in, let's say, Nova Scotia or Maine.
Okay.
So the psyllid pest, affects different states in different ways and different crops. I hope
When
that
are
answered your
they
question.
active? Are they most active here in Virginia?
They're most active during the summertime.
Okay.
That's when you have the adult psyllid, leading its life, laying its eggs. The nymphs are running around in, let's say, March, April, May. And so they have different lifespans. Right? And we're lucky that the boxwood psyllid has only one generation per year. The Asian citrus psyllid has between 5 and 12 generations per year. A female Asian citrus psyllid can lay 600 eggs. So when you do the math, it's just, astronomical how many psyllids could be, produced. And there don't seem to be any natural pests for the Asian citrus psyllid. People are experimenting with like a parasitic wasp from Pakistan to try to have them let loose and try to control the Asian citrus psyllid, but it's really, really hard.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any